It's story time. The story begins. Let the words enter your mind. Neurons fire away deep into Imagination Central. There, any adventure can play out. Waves of blooming wildflowers roll in the summer breeze. Butterflies flutter across the field, drifting up into the sky. You build a Persian palace from shadowy memories. Inside, sitting on his ottoman in flowing silk robes, a sultan speaks to his emissary, his eyes drawn thin as he issues a challenge to his people to bring him a riddle he cannot solve. You enter Storyland. Now your heightened focus turns to today's storyteller.
Hello, my name is Cooper Brown, and I grew up in Boulder, and I might as well have been raised by granola-eating coyotes. I grew up without a television, and I grew up listening to storytelling. J.O. Callahan, the great American storyteller, may well have narrated my childhood. This is an art form I grew up on, and it is art form I love. I tell as one half of the storytelling duo Stories with Spirit. We tell mostly to adults, folk tales and fairy tales, but we welcome children as well. So I have two stories today, both on the subject of thieves, which has strangely become a love of mine. I love thief stories. The first of these comes from Korea. Once long ago in Korea, there was a thief, and he was no ordinary pickpocket or cutthroat. He was a master thief. He was the kind of thief that every policeman, when they sat with their wives and children at night, it was this man they spoke of, and how they wished that they might be the one to lock him away. But he was never caught. And every judge, when he went to pray at temple, he prayed that he might be the one to try this thief's case. But he was never brought before him. And every jailer, when he sat dicing and drinking with his friends, why, it was this man they spoke of, and how they wished that they might be the ones to jail him. But he was never caught. And like all men, he grew old. His beard grew long and white, and his hands began to tremble. And there was a day when he walked in the marketplace, and he stopped in at a little shop to buy spices. And there, haggling with the merchant behind the counter, the jar of spices placed there, he reached into his coat, and he realized that he had left his purse at home. But he thought to himself, I am a great thief. And he scooped up that jar of spices and slipped it into his coat and walked out the door with the merchant being none the wiser. But as the door closed behind him, he felt a hand clap upon his shoulder and spin him around, and there before him was a young and handsome policeman who said, I knew it was you. I watched you as you walked in the market, and I watched you through the window as you stole those spices. Why, my father, he was the policeman in this market before me, and every night he would speak of you and how he wished that he might catch you. And now I have. And that policeman marched that thief off to the court, and there, behind his high bench, sat the judge. And that judge looked down at the thief, and he laughed, saying, I know you. My father, who was judge before me, who has been dead these 7 years, why, he prayed that he might be the one to try your case. And now you have come to me. Tell me, what has this old thief stolen? And the policeman produced the little jar of spices, saying, This jar, sir, worth perhaps 5 copper coins. Well then, it is my sentence that in recompense you shall pay 500 golden coins. The thief looked up at the judge, saying, Sir, I have not 5 golden coins to my name, let alone 500. Well then, you shall spend 500 days in prison. Sir, I am an old man. I have not perhaps 500 days left to live. Good. Then we will not be seeing you again. And with that, the thief was marched off to the prison. And at the gates of the prison sat the jailer and his young son, and the jailer laughed to see the thief, saying, Boy, you look at that old man there? Why, your grandfather, who was jailer here before me, he spoke of that man and how he wished he might be the one to lock him away. Now he has come to us. And they bowed before the thief, and they welcomed him in, and they showed him to the deepest and darkest of their dungeons. And there the thief sat On the little wooden bench, he put up his feet and he went to sleep. And the next morning, when the jailer's boy brought him his gruel, the thief called the boy over, saying, "Boy, you must go to the king, and you must tell him for me that I have for him an amazing and fantastic gift." "You want me to go to the king on the account of some old thief?" "Boy, if the king learns that you kept from him an amazing gift, what do you think he will do? Perhaps he will let you stay with me. I could use the company." And these words frightened the boy. And that next day he went before the king, and he bowed low, and he said, "Your Majesty, there is an old thief that has been brought to my father's prison, and he says that he has for you a fantastic gift." And the king laughed, and the queen laughed, and all the court laughed, and the king smiled. And he said, we had heard that that old thief was caught. And you shall bring him before us, and we shall see what we shall see." And the next day the thief was marched by the jailer and his boy before the king. And he bowed low, for he was a loyal man, if a dishonest one. And the king looked down at him, the ministers of state, the generals of the army, the priests of the church. And the thief produced from his pocket a little black lacquer box inscribed with gold filigree, and he handed it to the king. The king looked at it and smiled, saying, "This is nice. But thief, it would go well for you if you were not having a joke at my expense." And he opened the box, and his smile drained away, and he said, "What is this? This looks to me like a dried up plum pit. Your Majesty, it is in fact that. Thief, it would go well for you, as I said, if you were not having a joke at my expense. Explain yourself." "Your Majesty, it is, as you say, a plum pit. But it is, Your Majesty, a magic plum pit. Why? I tell you this. If you plant it tomorrow, on the next day it will have sprouted. On the second day it will have grown into a fine tree. On the third it will bloom with the most fragrant of flowers. And on the fourth day, why, it will bear you forth plums of solid gold." And the king's eyes grew wide as he looked with a little more admiration at that plum pit. "But thief, if you had such an amazing plum pit in your possession, why have you yourself not planted it?" "Your Majesty, you raise a valid question. You see, it goes like this. When I stole that plum pit years and years ago, I did not know that there was a certain taboo about the magic, that if a man had lied or stolen or cheated his fellow man, the magic would not work for him. And so, Your Majesty, I am a thief. I lie and I steal and I cheat to earn my daily bread. But you are the king. You see to the well-being of your people. You are beloved by all. Surely the magic will work for you." And the king, he looked down at that plum pit in his hand, and he thought of the golden robes that he wore, and the tapestries that lined his hall, and he thought of the children in the marketplace that begged for bread, and the children and the soldiers who marched off to war in his name. And he shook his head, and he said, No, thief, it will not work for me." "Your Majesty, well, it is true what they say, that the weight of the crown is heavy upon the heart, but surely, Your Majesty, your queen that sits beside you, who is known for her charity and grace, surely the magic will work for her." And the king handed that plum pit to his queen, and she held it in her hand. And she thought of all those times as a young woman when noblemen and princes had come to court her, and she had set one against the other and seen them spill their blood, so in the end she might be made queen. And she shook her head and said, "No." "No? No," said the thief. "Well, perhaps the prime minister, the man that sees that justice is done and that the laws are upheld, surely the magic will work for him." And the queen, she handed that plum pit to the prime minister, and he felt the weight of it. And as he felt it, he felt the weight of the gold in his pockets, and all those bribes he had taken time and time again to see this clan set above that one, and he passed that plum pit on, and it went from hand to hand to hand to hand around that room, from a priest to a soldier to a servant to a courtier, and at last the jailer's little boy shook his head and handed it on, and the thief held it up for all to see. Well, isn't that something, Your Majesty? That there is not a man or a woman in the room who would plant this seed, and yet I am the only one going back to prison today. And with that he turned and began to walk from the room, but the king held up his hand and said, "Stop! Thief, I believe that you have had a joke at my expense today. But you were as good as your word, for you have given me a gift. And so I ask you this, thief, what price was set upon your freedom?" 500 golden coins, your majesty." "Well then, my judgment is this. Every man and woman in this room shall reach into their pockets and pull out coins of gold and place them before me until there are 2 piles each of 500 coins. The first shall go to pay the thief's bail. The second to the thief himself, in thanks and recompense for the gift that he has given all of us today." And begrudgingly, first a priest and then a soldier and then the prime minister himself dug into their pockets, and they began to place coins of gold before the king. And soon there were 2 piles of 500. One was wrapped in silk and given to the thief, who took it, but before he could go, the king called him close, saying, "Thief." And then he bent his head and he whispered, that only the 2 of them might hear, on your allegiance as my subject, I ask you this, to be honest. Tell me, thief, is the magic real?" And the thief, he looked up at the king. He said, "Your Majesty, I stole that plum pit many, many long years ago. And in all the days from that to this, I have found neither a man nor a woman who would plant the seed. And so I tell you, your majesty, I think we will never know." And with that he turned and he left. And what became of him I cannot tell you. Thank you. This next story I first heard as the second half of a story by the amazing Jewish teller Diane Volstein. She first heard it from the rabbi and storyteller Shlomo Carlsbach. Once, long ago, but not so long ago, before each of our world wars, there was a little Jewish town near Warsaw that is not there today. And in that town there was a thief, and he was a master thief. Why, his hands were like the warm breezes of spring. He had but to ask you the time, and your watch would be gone. But to pass pleasantries with you in the street, and your purse and coat as well would be missing. Everyone in the town knew he was a thief, but he could never be caught at it. He grew richer and richer until he gave up thieving altogether. He went into investments. He built himself a beautiful new house. He sent his children, the boys and the girls, to the finest school, and he became a prominent member of the synagogue. And then one day, investments being what they are, he lost all his money. But his time in the synagogue, it had worked upon his soul, and he refused to go back to his former profession. He grew poorer and poorer until he begged for his bread at the side of the road. But the people, they looked at him saying, you who stole our things would come begging money from us? Never! And there came a night, the evening before Sabbath, when he sat on the stoop of the little hovel he now called home, surrounded by his hungry children, and he wept. And as he did, passing by in the street came the richest man in the town, a wealthy merchant, who recognized the thief from the synagogue. And he called the thief over, and the 2 men walked together, and they spoke. And as they did, the rich man counted out silver coins into his hand, and he pressed them into the hand of the thief, and he said, "Feed your children and honor the Sabbath." And the thief did. And the next week, again, the rich man returned, and again they walked and talked together, and again he counted those coins out into his hand, pressing them into the palm of the thief, saying, "Feed your children and honor the Sabbath." And this went on week after week, month after month, year after year. And the 2 men grew close in friendship. They sat next to one another in the synagogue. They began to study the Kabbalah together, and each Hanukkah, the rich man arrived with new coats and good shoes for each of the thief's children. And their beards, they grew long and white. And their hands began to tremble as each week they repeated that ritual as the coins were counted out, pressed into the other's palm. "Feed your children, honor the Sabbath." And as it happens in stories, these 2 men died at the same hour on the same day. And at the funeral of the thief, there were but his children and a few old rogues who had come to toast a true master of their profession. But at the funeral of the rich man, why, all the town was there, the Jews and the Gentiles alike. But for all the ritual and ceremony, the rich man found himself before the gates of paradise. And before those great golden gates were the iron scales of judgment, into which would be poured his good deeds and his bad ones. and he had done many great and good deeds in his life, many charitable acts, but he had in his dealings been as much a thief and a liar as his old friend, and he watched those scales tip against him until he was sure he would never see paradise. And then there came a wind that ruffled the rich man's beard and the robes of the angels, and he watched those scales tip into balance and passed, and the doors of paradise opened before him. And all was music and joy and light, but he stopped, saying, How is it I can be here? And he was told, Your friend the thief, he has stolen your sins. Thank you. I have had a strange love relationship with thief stories. I find them in all sorts of places. Every culture has them. And thieves are a strange category of person in stories. They are either very evil. There are evil thieves, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. They are the bad guys. Or they are in many ways the trickster character. They're the character who shows us our own faults. They're the character that shows us our own hubris and shows us that things are not always in balance. That the person you may think is evil and untrustworthy is in fact the person that saves you. And that often they put things back into balance as a trickster character. And I keep finding their stories, and I really love them. And these are two of them that I have found. The first story that I told is, in fact, the first story that I performed professionally. And the second is a story that is so very dear to my heart. So thank you.